welcome. I promised you an interview with Adam Vass when we finished Necronautilus for episode 3. Episode 2 was light, can't forget Spencer, but episode 3 of the top shelf, because it was a blast, and we probably could have kept talking about it for too long. Everybody wanted to, at least, which was great. It is. Necronautilus was a session that I guess spurred more conversation than anything that I've ever played up to this point, which feels like kind of the goal. Um, it's all words. Like what spurs that? Where did we come from? And feel free to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, because I'm terrible at introductions.
Sure. My name is Adam Vass, and I'm a tabletop game designer in Southern California. I publish my work under the banner of World Champ Game Co. Um, my most recent release, or a large scale release, being Necronautilus, the stoner metal science fantasy uh, planet hopping weirdness game that you played just a few days ago.
Yeah, and it was stoner metal's probably a great description for it, because the whole I don't know what spurred like how I ended up running the game, but it was just geometry and color was the whole game. I didn't even have any talking NPCs that whole thing, which even that was a shift. Yeah, where did this game come from?
It's kind of hard to say because it was definitely I feel like I usually remember, or I can pinpoint the inspiration for a particular game of mine, and I can't do that with Necronautilus. Um, it was a project that kind of just happened sporadically, and I went straight to Kickstarter with it because I knew it had something. I didn't quite know what, but uh, it was also at a time. This was last summer, so I don't have my regular work because of COVID-19, and uh, this was partly a scramble to stay creative and stay productive, but also consciously a choice to make something that was more appealing than some of the like strange little art house kind of games that I'd been making last summer. So it was this combination of heavy metal magazine and stoner metal playlists that I'd made and listened to, and just kind of like um, I'm I'm I have an adoration for metal, but I like very specific things, and there are a lot of things that I don't enjoy. So this is very specifically inspired by psychedelic stuff and just like fuzzed out riffy music, and then the visual aesthetics that tend to go along with that. So you have, like Black Sabbath's swirly purple color kind of stuff, and more modern bands like Elder, where you have floating pyramids and these strange landscapes and stuff that kind of evoke the themes and feeling of listening to that music. Um, that crossed with just sort of tinkering with some space games, because it's not a territory I spend a lot of time in creatively. I'm not a big fantasy person either, so I think a lot of my games are based more in human reality. And I wanted to do something that was not that, and kind of didn't even acknowledge that humans or Earth have ever or do exist. Um, so it was all these like this desire for escapism that I accomplished through, one, leaving our setting, but two, the escapism that I get from just like headbanging and slow droning.
All right,
Um,
so no, I love that. So before I have to ask then, before we go any further, top three favorite metal artists.
on the spot, I'm not going to do well, but uh, in that top three is a band called Pallbearer.
Okay.
That was definitely like a massive inspiration for a lot of my games, actually. I can think back to when I first launched a Patreon and I was making postcard games, and I had made a game about whether or not like these endless spirits should interfere with the world ending, or if it's just a net better that the world does end. And that was based on their record called Sorrow and Extinction. And I've been able to kind of trace a lot of songs and records of theirs to games and projects that I've made.
Plural games and projects, then. This is a
Definitely,
long-standing album.
they're a well that I come back to. They made a record called Heartless, and the cover is the sort of it looks like a sort of giant in a fetal position, and there's like mountains and growth coming off of it, and that immediately to me is an adventure starter. Like I see that and I go, okay, what about the people who come about this mountain, or what happens when you are running out of resources and you need to drill into the mountain, but the mountain is this being. And just the lyrics, the music, the riffs, the album art, everything kind of coalesces as a massive inspiration for me. um, and with that, there's another band called Spirit Adrift that similarly, that was a massive inspiration to Necronautilus. Even just obviously the band name Spirit Adrift is very much the consensus of Necronautilus,
Yeah,
the game.
it was weird to try to explain to four people who, I mean, even to myself, I've said it multiple times, but I was terrified to play this game because reading through it is an abstraction from any amount of game that I've ever played. It's something entirely itself, which lends itself like really well to being something people want on a shelf. Because I, I'll be honest, I bought it post Kickstarter. The Kickstarter had finished, and I was perusing things, and it's like this one was successful, and I pulled it up, and I knew that it was an RPG, but I had no concept of what was on inside of it. I bought it for the art. Like the cover, the alt cover specifically
Yeah.
was just incredible. So I snagged it just on that. And then I hadn't read it until, or read it in depth until a week before we ran it. And I opened the book and I get through the first 3 or 4 pages and I'm like, this is something else. I don't know how to parse the idea that I'm dealing with beings that don't, because I can imagine like an orc or a giant or an ogre or a tiefling or even like a fish person or aliens of any form with multiple arms, because you can still kind of tie them back, but just being a noxious gas cloud with a soul inside of it, it's like I don't know how to like rules govern that, but it almost takes away the point of the game to do so,
Yeah,
because
that was a deliberate choice to um, let players do whatever they wanted to within the limits of Spirit of Play. Um, and even there are mechanics like in the combat that kind of control that, even if you wanted to kind of break Spirit of Play. But the idea that the actual only thing that's limiting you as a player and your ability is your imagination, because you are not even confined by the understanding of having a rigid form.
yeah, and I think that was we had brief conversation about it before we went live for the session, and I think even still we ended up kind of functioning like a person most of the time, because it's hard to break out of the, like, I playing it a couple of times I probably could get to a place where it wouldn't be as uh, distanced, but the spirit of play and just letting people do whatever was really cool. We had a player um, turn a fairly uh, interesting word. I can't remember what it was now. It was like 3 or 4 syllable, really good word into maunch. Oh no, it was consume. They turned consume back into maunch so they could essentially have the same word. And it was only until after the session when we were all talking about it and like typing through Discord that I realized that maunch was spelled like we were still missing an H, and like there were things that weren't quite right about it, but by that point we were so in the game that nobody cared. Like we all understood what each other was doing.
Right. It actually says in the rules too that spelling doesn't matter,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a part of it. Like when you get these like Scrabble tiles of letters and you have no right clue what to do with them, making a facsimile is still something. It still feels rewarding, especially like in that example, they wanted a particular thing and they got there. It's just a matter of taking some liberty with the tools that you have available to you, and that's kind of this like meta experience of what
Yeah.
the interpretation of the words are to begin with.
Yeah, there's fun expression throughout the thing, and so I'm like, all right, now break down the word and make something else, and we keep going, and they're like, I don't know, there's so many letters. Um, but also there's just by the time we got about 20 minutes into it, there's excitement towards. We knew it was a one shot, so we used and just packed as many words as we possibly could into the situation, just back and forth. One of the other fun misspellings that ended up being was rogue, because there was no way you could actually have spelled the word, but they had ROW and G that they could keep and make it work. Or we spelt dirt with an O and then just slapped an accent on the side of it so that we knew what was going on.
Yeah.
So it, it somebody was hesitant to say it when we were talking about it at the end of the session, but it's a game that forces creativity. Like you can't
Yeah.
play it without trying to be.
Yeah, and I think some of that comes from playing more traditional role-playing games that don't feel creative to me. But the act of play doesn't feel creative. Um, like combat in a Dungeons and Dragons game is expected, and the way that it operates is extremely expected, to the extent that very rarely do I, in a group, experience any kind of um, lightning or light bulb moments in combat of, wow, I didn't know you could do that, or that's such a clever use of this tool, because so much of it breaks down to I swing my sword and I do this much damage. So even that is a major impetus of the Necronautilus design, is I want players, and I think game masters tend to relish in that creativity in prep and adventure design. So now, one, removing prep, and two, giving players that autonomy gives all players, including the game master, that creative moment during play, and everyone's sharing it. So it's a different experience. It's less compartmentalized, and it's more, like you said, I would say encouraged instead of forced. But that's how you function as a player, regardless of if you're a PC or a GM.
Yeah, no, and it's great. Like I really loved that mechanic because I I kind of understood what was going on with the idea of, we're going to lean towards this creativity and give it to the players when I started writing the session. And there's the first thing that the players did, and I don't know at what point you popped in, because I think you said you saw a short bit of it.
Yeah.
The first portion is they land on this planet, and there's this circle of geometric chromatic beings just chilling, almost like a Stonehenge in the center of these sands. And there's this massive chrome dodecahedron, which is their temple, that orbits the planet like a moon, like 12 feet away from the planet's surface, but at breakneck speeds. And I knew that they had to get in there to get the thing that they were after, but that's about as far as I got. And I'm like, I know this thing's just going to keep moving, and it's going to move fast. But I also know that based on how the rules are written, these words are supposed to be like extra cosmically powerful if they're, designed to be used that way. So they'll figure it out. And then I just kind of let it go. And sure enough, like there was an organic resolution to that in game from the players that felt rewarding and, kind of bolstered the situation, which was really fun to see because I really didn't write resolutions to anything. I wrote the first half and I let the players take the back half, which was really neat.
Yeah, that's my preferred GM style, is set up a problem and not set up any kind of solution, because the other thing about having played any role-playing game, especially as a GM, is you know that you cannot know. You know that you're in this entropy machine with all these people with different experiences and different goals, and different tools to accomplish those goals. And so even in the most railroaded campaign, you're going to have a player who does something that you could have never accounted for. And so that game is very well supportive of this philosophy of, as game master that I have, is that if you give them the problem, they'll make a solution. You don't have to codify one.
Yep.
And you don't really, even especially in this game, you don't really need to hold their hand and give them suggestions or clues or anything either, because they're more than capable of doing anything that they need to do. It's just a matter of figuring out how to best do those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure if any of the players that I played with are watching, the second room, which presents itself as a puzzle, glass room, and behind each of the walls is a different. The underneath the floor is a deep pool of water, and above them is lit with lava, a la Minecraft style. And then all of the walls of the room, once you walk in and the door seals, is like museum glass of just thousands and thousands of these same chromatic, like metal scarabs, just like filling the walls, and there's no perceivable door. I didn't write anything for that. That's as far as I got. I'm like, I'm going to build the weirdest room that I can think of, and then I'm just going to kind of let it go. We'll see what happens. Um, and again, like, it all sorted itself out, and it turned into be a really fulfilling thing as it moved forward, which was, yeah, it facilitates a really good call and answer from game master and player, which is fun. You mentioned combat, and I actually wanted to bring that up a little bit too. The clocks are very interesting.
Yeah.
Because from my perspective, at least from what I was reading on it, clocks don't designate health or anything of the sort. They designate progress. How you accomplish that progress doesn't matter.
Right, because this is one of the things I mentioned, that it is a rule that is built in to control spirit of play to some extent. Because in my imagination, there's a player whose word of power of choice is headshot, and they just one roll headshot any enemy, right? And you can either set it up in a mechanical way such that a headshot is an instant kill, and then that player is basically, there's still the odds that they might not succeed on their dice roll, but they're kind of inherently OP. And all the characters, by the virtue of how they're built, are overpowered. That again is kind of the appeal, is
True.
that you're everything. So rather than quantify enemy health and have players have this power that can immediately diminish health to zero, which I know people probably wouldn't do, because again, when you go into a game like that, you kind of set your expectation and you know kind of the right way to play. But I'm also picturing like people I don't know are playing this game. This is my most popular release ever, so it's out of my control how people play it for once.
Right.
So combat, using clocks to measure progress on a combatant or a group of combatants on a single clock, is one, a measure of how intense the sequence of combat is or needs to be, because obviously a 2 or a 3 clock is going to be easier filled than an 8, so your bosses have larger designations, and that's just a clear upfront to the players, hey, this one is going to take longer, it's going to take more work, and it's going to take some more creativity than something like that's lesser value. But at the same time, it is this abstraction of vitality, because the enemy combatants do damage to you equal to their unfilled portions of the clock. So as you are wearing them down, they become physically weaker, without that necessarily being an equivalency to health.
Yeah, because you can use a clock for anything. Clocks
Right.
are just a way to get through something if you choose to use them, but for enemies, they have that secondary use of the damage output health object there. Um, with as powerful as everything is, one of the conversations that was brought up via a question in chat over Twitch was, um, we were talking about how it felt as far as like a resource drain to use words, because if you use them successfully, they get burned. If you use them and you crit them, they get smaller. And eventually you start running out of these delineations. But you get them via experience and for solving puzzles and stuff. But what
It,
was your... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry to correct you. If you succeed, you don't lose it. Nothing bad happens.
Oh,
When you fail, it evolves. It gets more specific, which is a facet of this kind of ongoing thing. But when you succeed on a roll, you gain a memory, but the memory doesn't replace the word.
Oh. How did I... pre-agency memory that you recall in this moment. Okay, I'm curious now. If you would indulge me to
Sure.
interpret this passage, because I can't read it right then.
Sure.
It says, describe how you use your power and choose a word from your collection to inspire narration of a pre-agency memory that you recall in this moment and erase the word.
Sure. Okay, sorry. That antecedent is the word of in your collection that you're referencing, rather than the word of power that's installed.
Oh, okay. So if you succeed on a word of power, then
that word of power is retained, and you burn one from your collection. But also, so this is a thing that's sort of in post, already like a patch note I would like to have made, that I've started, instead of using words from your collection to inspire the memories, because it does burn through the currency quite fast, and some game masters are less
liberal.
Less would give less words out as rewards.
Yeah.
Like you said, if you go into it and you're like, let's do some words, especially one shot mentality.
Yeah, absolutely.
But sometimes you just are stumped, and sometimes you didn't prepare any, or whatever reason you have to withhold, it's valid too. But so in the patch, this is in the comments on the itch page, but it's not really wider in any form yet. That I just use whatever action you took to inspire the memory. So if it was firing a laser, then in what instance in your prior life did you fire a laser? Or how does firing a weapon remind you of another time in your history? So that way you're not burning through collection words as often, to accommodate for the fact that you might not be awarded them as often.
Interesting. Okay, because we played a variant of that then, because we burned the actual word of power, which is very interesting, I think, based on that, because now at this point everybody only used a word of power once.
Right.
So,
which I don't think is bad. I think that's a really interesting way of playing.
Yeah.
That's more like spell scrolls instead of having spell slots.
Yeah.
Like, and that sounds, especially in a one shot, kind of fun, because you're going to flex those creative interpretation muscles a whole lot more.
Yeah, so they use these words of power, and then each cast or call of that word of power, then they use the word of power in that context, however it was used, to inspire the memory, and then it was burned, and then you had to make conscious decisions to move more stuff over from your collection, and you had to use those as your words of power, which, yeah, I guess still fits with the same spirit of play, very much so, but it was...
Sure. But that would also eat into your
interesting
life pretty quickly too, because
Yes.
it's not free to do that conversion. So I could see that being a very brutal
was
experience.
Rough. Most people sat around 2 HP most of that game.
Yeah.
They were back and forth, but no, that's cool. I don't know, we talked about the balance of life and death too, and the fact that it is this circle of, we're going to take health, we're going to move this thing over here, and then we're going to gain health by utilizing the memory for something. in an abstraction, because the whole game kind of is, when you use a memory towards something, what did you imagine that as? Like, is it a cast, like a word of power, or did you imagine that more like a, like, I've retained this skill set at this point? Like, what is?
It sort of falls in between those two, I would say. So if you have a memory of having been a laboratory scientist or something, and then you come across a chemical in your journey and you need to either contain it or identify it or something, your experience as a lab scientist would allow you to do so. Um, so it is sort of more like in a game like Cthulhu Dark, if you say you're this profession and the thing that you're attempting to do falls under the purview of that profession, then you're given the extra dice. That's that
Okay.
mentality. Is if the memory seems to be relevant to the thing that you're trying to do, then it is, or at
Okay.
least if you can make a compelling case that it is.
Which makes sense. All of the players um, very much had these spectacularly human and somewhat tragic
Yep,
lives
that
in
tracks.
yeah, and you kind of follow these people unraveling, whatever it was. And it was only really till the end of the game, once we had the discussion, that it's like it really didn't matter if you were human or not, or from Earth, or from what time period of Earth, or you could have been from the Feywild, or some alien planet, or the Enterprise. Like, nobody cares at that
Yeah,
point. You're just something that's passed on.
right. That was the thing that was important to me too in the design, especially when I get into the setting elements in the back of the book of nothing here references human existence or Earth because it's the afterlife and it takes place kind of outside of time. So um, anything you can imagine does exist here and did die to be here. Uh, which I thought was a fun thing. And then I also noticed through playtesting and writing that you still kind of go into it with an expected human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I added the mechanic that you start with a reason. The one memory that you're able to retain at the start of play is the reason you became a death agent. And populating the reason table in the book, which is a random table, I deliberately tried to make everything sound like it did occur in alien places or with alien creatures, and they were less about human experience to try to get players away from that on the first punch.
Yeah, drive people towards. If you utilize the table, or even if you read the table, it gives you that extra context of the theme.
Right.
Okay. No, I like that a lot. It was also, I don't know. We all had lots of really good things to say about the game, because I I hand cast all of the sessions that I do. Most of TPK stuff kind of falls somewhere in between there. The channel that I run, like, my show on. And some of them are just, we put up a casting call for anybody who is a player listed through, TPK, and people will grab them. But I'm pretty specific to pick people for TPK, or for the top shelf, because for things like Necronautilus, it's niche enough that I think there are absolutely groups of players who just wouldn't touch it. Um,
Sure.
and making that decision is really cool, because that means everybody who does play it, like, that's their thing. You got to find those people who just will dig into it.
Right. I think that's a goal with a lot of my work, and I think it's a goal that's well realized through Necronautilus, like maybe more than some of my other like pie in the sky kind of projects. Like you said, you picked it up because you saw the cover.
Hmm.
That's kind of the whole pitch here. Is you're a dead soul in space, and the cover is a skull cloud galaxy. Like,
Yeah.
if you need to know more, this game actually already might not be for you, because that image or that sentence already tells you a lot of what you want to know about it, which is that it's weird and psychedelic and probably kind of metal, especially with the like logo type being obviously this sort of stylized symmetrical lettering style of that's associated with metal.
Yeah. That
There,
was sorry, I did. It reminds me, because I opened it up for. Does anybody have any like qualms with the game? And the only thing anybody could think of at the point that we were talking about it was the like the headings and the titles and certain passages are just entirely inscrutable because of the fonts. And like because I bought it as an art book,
Sure.
I definitely leaned into that, and I'm like, I don't care, because at the end of the day, the text is its own thing. Like, I can read the things
Right.
that matter. The rest of it, I don't have to.
Yeah, I present it as an art book and as an art object, and it's this
Hmm.
kind of living project to me too, where I can make new planets and make new setting pieces, and I can make them as decipherable as they need to be.
Hmm.
Uh, and part of that concession too was if you can't read a header, the text will repeat the title. So if you really need to know what it says, it's in there. It's not necessarily for a quick glance, but the headers and the a lot of the like hand lettering and custom lettering stuff that I did in the book
Hmm.
was more to invoke theme and feeling than it was obviously to be legible.
Yes, and we talked about that for a good couple of minutes too, about that it was very tied to the theme. Like even, and somebody made specific mention of the opening page to the book that is the gravestone with the
Mm-hmm.
words that kind of crest over the top of it being very indicative of that and the feel of the book you get right off the bat.
Right.
Um, and then we talked about as well. All of us, myself included, were very much impressed with the full two-page spread that you dedicated towards uh, safety.
Oh, yeah. It's also, again, because this was going outside of my normal audience, which is much smaller, and a game that asks you to interpret and reinterpret language,
Hmm.
that I could very quickly see that being played or used in inappropriate ways or to further bad actor goals. Um,
Yeah.
so that was pretty paramount. I had kind of wished I had been able to come up with some that were a little bit more diegetic and kind of felt like part of interacting with the space, or interacting with the setting itself. I don't think I did a poor job using the tools that other people made and presenting them, but it was definitely important to me from the start. And like you said, the first thing you see is this grave, but within the first 10 pages is this 2-page spread of safety.
Yeah.
It
Well,
it's hand in hand with here's the things you need to know before you go any further.
of course. No, and I think that's we stopped specifically at the Olivia Hill rule because
Yeah.
I'd never heard it myself. I didn't realize that that was a thing that was widespread, and perhaps you can share a little bit about that here in just a second. But uh, I think that passage to me, the more I kind of connect the realization that this is uh, the front visuals and the kind of nature of it being a metal inspired, it presents itself very intensely, and a lot of those themes can very easily be taken.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that one Olivia Hill passage was particularly important, or at least struck me as that, because it's almost dissuading the kind of people, or the other kind of people, who would pick up a book like this and go, "Oh yeah, this fits my aesthetic, but also I'm really fucking problematic."
Right. And that is, I mean, that's a problem in culture as a whole,
Hmm.
but metal is obviously there's quite a bit of it in it, especially in certain subgenres of metal. And like you said, those people would see my book and want it, which is nice to know that people like the thing I made enough to pick it up on aesthetic. But and this was a thing I experienced with Morkborg too, because I know that that game is made by people above water.
Yeah.
But the type choices and the illustration style and stuff could just as easily be made as um, an appeal to people who are not above water.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean,
and so that was the thing I was conscious of. The Olivia Hill rule was actually something I was introduced to on my uh, big project prior to Necronautilus, which was called A Guide to Casting Phantoms in the Revolution, that I co-designed with Will Jobst. Um, it's a game that you play on a pentagram and you summon phantoms to do uh, political intrigue and crime
it,
against the aristocracy.
Why does that sound just a little bit like Ten Candles? Have you
Uh,
played Ten Candles at all?
I have.
Okay.
They're not similar physically or mechanically in any kind of
Okay.
design way.
Dope.
Um, but Guide has that rule in it because it is a game about people who are oppressed by this regime and rise up through it. But in doing so, you're also um, dealing with these ethical dilemmas of the tools that you're using are demons.
Fair
Um,
enough.
and you get into religious and ethical quandaries that way that you role play out. But it was important that obviously this game is not for bootlicking, and this game is not to role play as the French aristocracy. You are people who are fundamentally opposed to it, and including that rule in it, especially in just in historical fiction, I think, or in historically foundational role playing games, um, is good and important because when you think of a lot of historical events that a game might be based on, they're generally rife with problems.
Yeah. I would like to believe at its core, role playing games, as me and you sit in the community, whether they're old or new, the concept of role playing games and the ability to take yourself out of the world into a different story and tell a story and be a part of something else with a community should inherently at its core, and I would like to think it always has been at its core, about escaping towards something better, as opposed to finding yourself in a place where I'm gonna relive fascism because that's the thing that I want to do. Because
Right. And it's difficult, especially when your setting is oppressive. Like both of those examples, the Guide to Casting Phantoms and Necronautilus, have settings that are intended to be um, ruled by someone who is the ruler, whether you like it or not. And then you, through play, have to kind of discover what your duty is or what your responsibility is to that figure. Because death is presented as neutral in Necronautilus.
mm-hmm.
They're the blind god that you do missions for. But I deliberately don't say if what you're doing is just, right? Like if these missions are just in a utilitarian kind of way, because it's not up to me to say that the setting is a particular designation or that your characters are. Because playing the problem, I'm getting on a whole tangent,
No, go for
but
it, please.
um, because like you said, you want to escape to something better, but a lot of the time that is accomplished by putting your characters in a situation that is not better and having you play as the people who are, right? Because you're trying to topple these systems and
mm-hmm.
these structures that promote and encompass that thing that prevents our reality from being better,
Yeah.
which is distinct from going to a setting that doesn't have those trappings, which is its own thing, right? That's not a bad thing either, to go to play a game that doesn't have systematic oppression and all of these problems with it, because
Right.
then the problems that you go and solve as a character, they're different. So you get escapism in different ways, and sometimes escaping is confronting the things you don't like head on, but in a game you have the power to make that active change, and in reality it's much more difficult to accomplish that change.
Yeah. I think that um, it's actually a really good tangent or like segue into another thing that we had talked about a lot in regards to the memories and things that you end up creating, or the storytelling that you put forward as a player. And at least what we found at our table is, or I'll tie this back, because what you're talking about there with kind of toppling that oppression or the system itself that's holding you, whether it be benevolent or malevolent. You don't get to know, especially at the beginning of the game, so you just see it as this authoritarian, um, like death had perceived. And I'm happy that with the way that you said that. Now I'm tangenting. I'm happy that with the way that you said that. the whole purpose of the mission that we ran on the episode that we did could go either way and could be interpreted entirely either way. You don't know why Death asked the thing that he did, whether or not he knows something more about the thing, or if he's, after it just to be spiteful or,
Right.
to wrest control because he should know this. So that pleases me as a DM greatly. But you kind of put yourself in a place as players, especially if you play in a system with rulers or oppression or racism of any form, even tactfully handled racism. I'm kind of D&D has been a weird thing over the
Sure.
last little while, and they don't do the greatest job, but it's there. And you put yourself in a place again that I would like to believe that as players, what we want out of that, and from the stories that I've played from like D&D or other things, is that they almost true to form always move towards people deserve a better situation,
Hmm.
and we want to enact that change, and here we can. Like it doesn't. There's always that kind of pull if you're in that setting to make something better, or to have this kind of catharsis of we can't do anything all the time out here in the real world because everything's far vaster, and we don't have that kind of control. We can work at it all we want, and we can feel good about being a part of that side of things. But here we can make a difference, and we can watch that change, and we can be proud of it. And that rapid change in storytelling, it always feels like it moves that way, which is very therapeutic.
Right.
Um, and the memories that at least we've found kind of function the same way. Um, there's this overarching feel of it doesn't matter how many sessions you play through of Necronautilus. I think at its core, there is an amount of the game that is kind of finding, even if you're not human, but you're finding your humanity through the course of play.
Right.
Multiple sessions of this, we're going to start piecing together memories, and I'm going to remember who I am and start to get that control back for myself and make decisions on, is that who I want to be still, or let me get back to that person because I miss that, or and that is fascinating to me from a storytelling perspective, that you've like um baked this like therapeutic quandary into the game.
Yeah. That's definitely by design. That's a extreme choice to say. Again, this game will reward you for playing it the way that you want to play it. So, if you interpret words in a particular way, you can accomplish certain things. But if you interpret even just the power dichotomy of words or memories and how you lean into one versus the other, you will get the experience that you want. And that memory mechanic is there for that. Is everyone starts the game on this equal plane. You're all effectively the same PC, right? There's no classes, there's no special skills beyond whatever words you can interpret. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have a special sword. Everyone just has their cloud body, and it is kind of stripped of identity. So the purpose, the functionality of you as an individual is obfuscated at the start of play. And if you don't care, if you want to be, a foot soldier for death, which sounds cool, you're allowed to do that. Um, but if you're like, but who am I really? That there is a branch there for you to grab onto and start to kind of answer that question. And then, like you said, it brings about its own questions and what you choose to do with those things. And I think there becomes a cycle in that part too, where you have exposed some memories and you've learned some bit about yourself. And then you're either I wouldn't say it's a binary path, but you can really double down and chase your memories and chase that life incline to try to max out,
Mm-hmm.
because that is one of the ways that your character can end, air quotes. uh, or you can say, actually, I don't want to uh, deal with whatever thing I left, or maybe the thing that the memories that I'm having are traumatic and or in some way something that I'm avoiding for a reason. Then you can deliberately choose to use words and be the death agent and not have to go back to whatever sort of experience that you presumably abandoned. Um, because similarly, those memories themselves are subjective. They're open to interpretation, and the more that you use them, the more context that you give them, they can change through play. Because I was thinking when I designed that of the movie Memento that I really loved, that at the start he says he has I'm sorry, I don't want to spoil it, and I don't know if you've
No,
seen
go
it, but
for
I
it.
don't
I
want to
love
take
Nolan
advantage.
stuff.
Great. Uh, the idea that I don't remember very much, but I remember that my partner is dead and I think this guy did it. And then you work yourself backwards, you add context to those memories, you add a little bit of information here and there, and you learn that the whole story, your supposition of it does not contain the whole story. There's so much more to it. And that memory can be exploited by people who could interpret it differently than you. So even in Necronautilus, if you remember being a jilted lover and being abandoned, and that's your reason that you just had nothing left and you joined because your family abandoned you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a valid reason to run away until you start to explore that memory and you learn that they abandoned you because you are bad, right? Like all of a sudden now you've explored the memory and you've learned a really important facet of your individual identity, which was removed from you because the perfect agent or whatever does not need to be distracted by these things. This is another facet of the game: is memory is a distraction from your duty.
Mm-hmm.
And so indulgence in yourself, in your individuality, is against protocol. So this is just another kind of like meta societal commentary of fall in line and everything is okay, and as soon as you start to kind of think for yourself, then you're up shit's creek.
No.
So uh definitely touching on a lot of things. Memory serves a lot of functions in the game in that way, and beyond just another skill that you can use to accomplish your goal. It is meant to open up that more narrative path for you as a player if you're into narrative paths in your games.
Yeah, no, and it's wonderful because what it does too is bind together a game that would otherwise be almost entirely episodic. I
Mm-hmm.
sat and I thought, and I could not figure out a way to really design a long form campaign, despite the fact that it would work really well.
Right.
Like the rules connect that way, that would have one overarching story. They all are kind of their own little tasks that connect to, maybe a couple episodes on this planet or a couple episodes from, this station to this planet.
Right.
And the story, the main thing that connects all of that are the memories and the players. You really give them all of the tools to build whatever they want out of those experiences, so you don't notice that really it's just kind of, at least from my perspective, it's very much a mission to mission kind of thing. Like Death doesn't
Yeah.
give a shit. So
Right.
he's just going to put you on this checklist. You're making out of that something important.
Right. You'll never run out of missions. So there's not an end to that list, and they're all
Right.
randomly generated for that reason. Because my idea is every session you go to a different planet, it has a problem, and you maybe solve it, and then you move on. Um, and there's not a lot of consideration there, especially when you are just kind of doing what you're told to do,
Yeah, it's a
which
nine to
was
five. I
right.
mean,
And that is again like a major facet of the design is like you can do that. It wouldn't necessarily feel very rewarding, but it is an option to just play planet hopping mission accomplishers. Um, And I think so by having when you succeed on a word of power use that it instigates a memory, that is this carrot in front of the horse to say, if you want to if you want to kind of branch off of your expectations,
Mm-hmm.
here it is, here's your opportunity. Like what the and the book says too, like indulging in your memories is illegal, but you're the person in theory who would enforce that. So
Right. You
it
still go
it
into it.
also creates its own thing, this sort of authority vacuum.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's there to be like, if you want it, here it is. And the campaign style of play, you almost can't avoid it at a certain point. From just the probability of rolling dice, you're going to have collected some memories, and some of them you'll have found useful. And the more you engage with them, the more that they want to engage with you, the more that they encourage a particular style of play.
Yes, I love that. And everybody resoundingly at the table wanted to play a longer form version of this, despite the fact that when I picked it up and kind of had my first inclinations towards it, it looked like something that was going to be very one shot designed. But
Right.
the memories just entirely subvert that, which is very cool. Um, Speaking of memories, it occurs to me that there is one thing that I was unclear on, and maybe I read it wrong.
Sure.
Um, is Let me see if I can find it, because it has to do with, let's see. Oh, well, I've solved my own thing. So based on this, you start with memories.
You start with a reason, which
You
is
start with a
a
reason.
functional. It's like a
Okay.
because one, that was an intent to get you into more alien headspace, but
Right.
also um, it was difficult for players to come up with their first memory with no context. So
Oh
having a
yeah.
reason gives you this platform from which you can continue to climb and develop further memories and context for your individuality.
Oh, here it was. I misinterpreted the fact that on the character sheet descriptor
Yes.
stuff, it reads um, as they emerge through play, showing glimpses of your soul's existence before the death. Players write up to 4 memories here. Individual memories are not often reliable or objectively true. Revealing more memories will show a more well defined picture of your prior life. And my head said, okay, so you can only have 4 memories at a time, but I guess that doesn't, there's no cap to memories, is there? Or do they get used, or how does that
They
function?
don't go away. They do evolve in the same way that words of power evolve. So the more that you use them, you add context to them, so they become more specific. The and more powerful. So there are kind of less instances in which you can use them, but the likelihood that they will succeed is higher. Um, there's 4 slots on the character sheet because it is more so intended for one shot graphically, but
Right.
um, no, you could have you would incur through longer play more memories than that, and it's just by virtue of being a half letter size book that you need more space to write more stuff.
No, you're good. I appreciate that because I feel like part of these conversations is if anybody comes in and sits and listens, I want them to correct my faux pas that
Sure.
I that have it on screen because I was having people in theory. Nobody ended up using any memories because they are more specific, and you're right.
Right.
Um, they would eventually end up kind of cycling them out of their headspace, which I thought was an interesting mechanic initially, but um, yeah, the building a whole person over a long-standing campaign is just get a second sheet of paper
Yeah.
for anybody listening out there. Well, cool. No, all of this is rad. It is really just a cool frickin' system. And then what is let's see, the expanded content
Yes.
is planets and things,
It's mostly additional setting stuff. There's
setting stuff.
standalone games that take place in the universe.
Oh,
There's also sort of supplemental character stuff, and almost all of it is also written by guest designers. So the core book was predominantly me doing design and illustration and writing. Stellar Remnants, the compilation scene, that's all done by other people, except I threw one extra planet in the back because I just couldn't stop.
at the very end. Yep,
Yeah,
that's really
and
funny.
so it is just different ways to interact with the setting and the space and give kind of more adventure prompts, because as we mentioned earlier, I'm very much just present a setting and a problem and let the players do whatever. um, there's a little bit different approach in some of these planets. One of my favorites, Viditya Valetti, wrote a planet that I meant to talk about a while ago, that classism is a major thing in the setting, and almost every planet kind of has this own iteration of how classism works in its structure. But Viditya's planet involves these wealthy people in basically like a white collar prison. It's not really a prison; they can do whatever they want, but they are being contained, and they're working on some system, magical or scientific or whatever, that will allow them to escape the realm of death and come back to life. And that's obviously not something that you can abide by. So there's a lot of interesting setting stuff that adds to the core setting structure of the book. Similarly, Will Yobst wrote some villains, and they're mostly transient. There's not necessarily details on where they come from. It's just what damage they hope to do and what will happen if you ignore them. And I think that's a really interesting way to build an adventure as well, to have these big bad villains floating around space, and you as the game master can choose to introduce them or not, and then also can kind of have these clocks ticking in the back of your head on how they might affect the universe directly or indirectly for your agents to then clean up.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just flipping through. Beginning of the book says you drew all of this too. All the layout and drawing
Yeah,
is nice.
same with the core book. I drew all the art.
That's super cool. I'm
Thank you.
I'm way about that. Like I love the art in the book. That's Did you do all the lettering as well?
Yeah, I did. All the custom lettering is by me. There's obviously a lot of typefaces and stuff, and I didn't. I don't think I designed a typeface for this. I definitely designed and released. Oh, you know what I did? There's one full custom typeface that I used, the page 44 for spacefaring complications. Um, that's actually a black letter typeface that I designed for use in this book.
Well, now I have to look because I'm curious.
um, but
Oh
but
hell
yeah, a
yeah.
lot of all the like metal style lettering is me, and all the illustrations. A lot of it's with traditional ink. I was hunched over a desk for 10 and 12 hours doing actual paintings and scanning them into the book,
Mm-hmm.
which hurt at the time, but it was very extremely rewarding. The only art that I didn't do myself is the standard version cover, which is by Shell Khan, this death agent exploding into space. Um, whereas the version that you have with the skull on it, that one was me.
Oh, I love it. I think this is because it gave you the option in the Kickstarter, and I couldn't not
Right.
with the big Technicolor skull.
It's funny because that was the placeholder graphic while Shell was still working, but I had a schedule and I had to launch, and enough people liked the placeholder that I just had to make it optional as a variant cover.
Yeah, you're like, nah, go ahead. Yeah, no, We Who Oppose Death, Will Jobst's section is really interesting. I love the luckiest person in the universe. I think
Right, that's them.
there's so much. Yeah, the fact that it's the name is so good. I think conceptually, just the luckiest person in the universe trying to avoid death and
Right.
outsmart is way fun. So tell me, as we're kind of rounding into the twilight of this interview, tell me a little bit about more of your current projects.
Sure. I actually just wrapped up a Kickstarter for what I would consider the opposite of Necronautilus, a game called
Yes.
Babes in the Wood. It is about kids who get lost in the woods on Halloween, and they help the people that they come across with their problems in an effort to kind of, well, there, as I'm saying it, I realize there's a lot more commonalities than I admit. But as they learn more about themselves and the things that make them who they are, they're able to sort of make progress towards leaving the wood and return home. It's inspired by the cartoon Over the Garden Wall, but it has also a lot of commonality with Adventure Time and all those kind of modern Cartoon Network shows that are surrealist and strange, but they also teach you a lot about just heart and what it means growing up and all these themes. So I just finished the Kickstarter for that, and the text is in editing and expected to go to print very soon. And actually, in about on February 22nd, I'm launching another Kickstarter for Aether Operations, which is much more in line with Necronautilus.
I'm very excited for Aether Operations.
Aesthetically and tonally, is these manipulators, is what the player characters are called, and they traverse the 4 realms of bone, brain, meat, and spirit in an effort to restore this diminishing balance. And in each realm, there are all these keepers who would want to wield the power of imbalance, and then in doing so make things more dangerous and more hazardous.
The most metal Osmosis Jones I've ever heard of.
Yeah. And each realm has its own distinct art style that I'm also doing. So the cover shows all 4. It's like a head that's composed of each layer. So there's a mix of hand painting and collage and digital illustration, and it makes this really kind of gonzo experience visually. The zine itself also it's presented as a 5x7 zine, but every spread it gets larger until you end up with a 19 by 27 inch poster that is the interior.
Oh yeah, yep, it is indeed. Because I didn't realize that this was yours when I bought it.
Yes.
But these are fucking awesome as well.
Thank you.
I
wanted to make a 1-page game on a really big page. That was the philosophy there. And also, like with that one, with Hell Cabin 1, I wanted an art post, like a movie poster, a poster that you would put on your wall, whether you played it or not, because I acknowledge a lot of us as RPG collectors have the ever-present heap of games you would love to play someday. So I like to offer another function to the physical format that might not just be play-based. So these are art objects and presentations, and
I can't remember what they're called. It's 13 and the other one. You have 3 posters right now, if I recall.
Yeah. 13 is my Hereditary-ish story game. That's a poster where one side just is no game mechanics. That was me wanting to design this fictional film poster. Hell Cabin is another one, the one that you just held up, and then I have The Medium is the Message, which is a sort of society doesn't value creatives and society is crumbling. So how do you as a creative confront that? And so it's a little bit more of a trad style of you're a group of players with skills and you want to go solve these problems. But the skills are based in the style of art that you create rather than having swords and guns and stuff. If you're a painter or you're a dancer, what does it mean for you to help people and stop this invading force? Which was an 11 by 17 poster that was also a painting and this other just format.
I love it. I really appreciate, because I have yet to grab both of those, but I'm gonna eventually snag them just so I can have all 3 of them like as art on my walls. Because my walls are decidedly bare behind the abyss behind me. But those are I peruse a lot of Exalted Funeral, but I've never actually been to your site until like a week ago, and it was amazing how many, because I own this one as well.
Right.
And I had not made the connections between all of these. This was the first one. Solo role-playing games baffle me. I have yet to play one and this is the first one that I've bought because I'm trying to get myself to buy into the idea.
Sure.
What does that mean how do you make one of those? Like, because I can understand the give and the
So
take, but what is this?
yeah, well, this is actually the second role playing game that I made and published. Right after the first iteration, right after the first iteration of Babes in the Wood, I made All We Love We Leave Behind, which is my solo letter writing game,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting because it is a creative writing exercise at its heart. There are mechanics to it, but they're loose, and it is not necessarily a experience that it is a game that about grief and overcoming, or hopefully overcoming grief, um, through the abstraction of writing letters to someone who doesn't write back to you, and it plays with this with time in reality as well, of the idea that when you send a letter, you wait a certain number of days that the game tells you before you write again, and forgetting to write is a function of the game, because that's reality, because we're not all just playing one game for a week, right? Like, everyone has lives, and that's kind of the function of the game too, is to introduce this issue, which is loss, and to over time contextualize it in your own life, I guess.
Yeah.
But through fiction, through character. So there's some safety in the escapist element of it, but it is still an emotional experience.
Is
There, sorry. Solos are rough for me too, just as an attention issue.
hmm.
And I think a lot of the time I start with the best intentions and I don't finish. And I think there is, because that aspect is cooked into All We Love and how it works, and your kind of ultimate goal as a writer is to stop writing, because your story is recontextualized as about you instead of about this person who is lost. Um, that was an interesting function to me to explore as a designer, to say, I want you to stop playing this game, because stopping is resolution.
Find an end,
Right.
and let that be the closure.
Yeah.
Okay. Um. Okay. Maybe a final question then, and I apologize if
Sure.
we lean towards the serious, but I am genuinely curious. You pour a lot of there's a lot of introspection
Yeah.
through all of the conversations that we've had, particularly today, and all of the kind of philosophies that you bake into your games, which feels like a lot of you, from what I'm
Absolutely.
at least gathering. Um, is there a reason or a specific drive that pushes you towards making games that make people find that or work through things?
I think there's a interesting split in my goals as a designer and a publisher, because I do want to be understood. I mean, I think that's kind of just an artistic aspiration in
Yeah.
general. You create art so that someone can think the thing that you're thinking, or feel the thing that you're feeling, or feel the thing that you want them to feel, for whatever empathic or societal reason. So there is a lot of that in all of my design. This is how I think about responsibility, or even in Aether Operations, which is a gonzo game. It's really about being powerless in a system that is crumbling, and you're expected to do something about it. It is this idea of like climate terror and me not using a plastic straw, like the illusion that I have control over a situation that's much bigger than me. So these characters are moving towards a doom, and they know that it is doomed, but they still try.
Mm-hmm.
So that even in games where I try to do just kind of balls to the wall, fun action stuff, I can't help but put something that I'm thinking into it because I made it, and those are the things I think. So I think all of my games are kind of inextricably linked to my own philosophy and ethics in that way. Similarly, Necronautilus was nearing status to me as a power fantasy because you can do all these things, and you're going to these places where you don't live to do violence usually. So how do you reconcile that? And part of that is the memory system and having the opportunity for individual philosophy, but also part of it is making the setting worse than you.
Right.
Is populating this planet with terror beasts and warlords, because then it doesn't feel so bad when you go and fuck up their lifestyle because they deserve it.
Well,
So yeah, I don't know that I think it's unavoidable to some extent that if I made it, it has a large piece of me in it.
no, it's great. Like I love it. I think it's incredibly admirable as an artist to be that poignant about yourself in a game. I think that's really important to make something unique as well. And everything that I've read of yours, at least up to this point, is unique. And I'm excited for. I am excited for Babes in the Wood. I know most of TPK is excited for Babes in the Wood, the channel, the Discord itself. So I'm gonna
Good.
actually I'm gonna talk to you about that later too, because
Sure.
I think it'd be fun to run that as
Yeah.
well. But you I'm excited to check out the other one that you just released today earlier as well, the
Oh yeah.
Frozen.
I
Uh,
loved it. I love Frozen, and I think that and my release in January, and these are small scale things I do through my Patreon,
yeah,
because otherwise I just don't think I'd be able to afford them the time and money. Um, so in January, I made a game called Veneration that was inspired by Metallica's Saint Anger, which is a very maligned
I
record.
saw that. That one's actually sitting in my cart right now because that
The
one.
cover is just this fist holding a blade, and
Mhm.
there's no text even on the cover. I thought that was a
Mhm.
power move. So that going back to back with the game I released today, which is called Born of Cold, which was initially inspired by Frozen and got quite a bit further out from there. Um, but I was thinking about it today actually as just an interesting pairing of things that you're not supposed to like.
Yeah.
um, the kind of objectively one of the worst Metallica records, and also this Disney princess movie. I'm not supposed to like these things, but I do, and these are these examinations of why, right? Like they're
Yeah.
not necessarily me telling you to go watch Frozen, but if you read Born of Cold or you play it, you say, and Born of Cold is presented um, thematically as a dark fantasy, as it's more
Yeah.
inspired by the fairy tale that inspired the Disney movie. So it naturally has um, weird stuff and danger. But it's also mechanically very similar to Hell Cabin, my Evil Dead game, where people are
Yeah.
playing different aspects of the setting and they're kind of in opposition to one another, and different moves kind of fuel different actions by each of the players. So rather than explain to you why I like this kids movie, it is an opportunity for a person to read and play through and kind of experience some of the things that I find special about those forms of media. So same with Saint Anger, a record that people don't like, and I was a little bit taking a piss when I made the game, but I wanted to make a sincere interpretation of just what it feels like to listen to that record and be kind of thrashed out and angry, and remembering mowing the lawn in 8th grade and having it on my Walkman, and like just being in this kind of weird anger zone.
Yeah.
um, and so these smaller projects allow me the opportunity to um, highlight things that influence me, even if that influence is indirect or almost subliminal, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't think Disney's Frozen has a whole lot in common with Necronautilus, but when I can boil down the property and make a game that highlights these things that I find interesting or special or distinct, then you find the common threads between all these influences on me and how they mix with the things I care about or find important, and then I spit them back out and present them.
Well, it's honestly, it's been a pleasure. Like, I really like learning about people. I think that's super important, and I don't know, like your games have a very specific um, uh, community to all of them that makes you want to explore that, whether that be yourself or for somebody who wants to, obsessively figure you out. Go check out World Champ Game Co. And buy all of these because they're all vastly different and have spectacular stuff going for them. I mean, I've got 3 of them already that I'm taking a look at, and I know that there are a couple more that I'm interested in. So, um, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, totally.
We've got. I'm not really going to give episode titles because I feel like these are in betwixt time right now, but the last episode we played obviously was Necronautilus. Spectacular. Go check that out. The one after this, we are going to play Iron and Lies by Bats, Project Nerves, which is going to be a hell of a time. A whole system without dice, all about the Feywood. So that's going to be its own dive into design. But thanks for hanging out. I'm sure we'll see some more of your content around. But everybody take care, and we'll see you in the next episode.